I'm a big believer that things are not just the way they are, and people are not who you think they are. And also, let's talk about apartments. If you're moving to any apartment, try to do your research, just some sort of like a background to find out who are the owners of this apartment and what do they practice spiritually, because business itself is a spirit. Money is a spirit. Money is spiritual. We even hear of money affirmations, and mine is every coin that I spend comes back to me in triple amounts. We've seen even what are they called? Money. The people. I don't know if you've seen these conversations where they're doing the money festival. It's a conversation about the cycle of money, the characteristics of money. What does money do to you? Do you attract money? Is money running away from you, or are you running towards money? Are you chasing money? Because if you're chasing it, it will keep on running away from you. The abundance mindset and the money mindset. Okay, I believe finding out if you're moving into any apartment or sleeping into any hotel, or could be an Airbnb, you're renting a maisonette or the bungalow, whatever kind of apartment you're moving into, find out what were the cycles of life that the person who was living in that house before they moved out, that they were dealing with and going through. Because I now believe that your success rate now depends with where you live, because we live in such a day and time, especially the now, where it's like there's a certain quick rush, urge, and thirst for people to get wealth, money, to be rich, and they're doing every sort of thing to arrive there. But I also believe it's not just about acquiring those things, because there's people who, I don't know if you've ever had, somebody just had 100 million and it vanished. And if you were to ask them and sit them down and just inquire, like, bruv, what did you do with 50 million Kenya shillings? They can't tell you a single story. They're also, in some sort of like a trance. So money is spiritual. And I believe there's people, because the other day I listened to Dr. Mumbi Saraki's story about, she was living in a certain apartment, was it in Nyali or Diani? And she was going through some sort of, I'll say, bad luck, because it's possible to inherit patterns of poverty, cycles of misery. It's possible for you to inherit dysfunction and bad luck from that apartment you're moving into. And that's why I refuse to just believe that you just moved into an apartment and your life now is going downward spiral. You can inherit dysfunction. Let me ask you, if millionaires pass down wealth to their children. By the way, just the other day, I think in the book, there's this book by Robin Sharma, The Leader Who Had No Title. There's a place where he talks about every one of us has a filter. And there's a philosophy that was said by Oprah Winfrey. She was having a sit down with these philosophers, spiritual philosophers, and they said, the philosophy goes, the premise goes, you're a product of who and where you come from, but life just structures your experiences and how you progress on. And that's why, let me prove it to you. If your father was rich, you're likely to also be rich. If your mother and father struggled with poverty and generational patterns of dysfunction, divorce, it is likely to be carried over to you, because you are your mother. You are your mother's son, you're your father's daughter, and you carry that DNA. It flows through your cellular. And that's why things about generational patterns, generational curses, and wealth are real. If generational wealth and generational curses are real, what will prevent you from not inheriting problems of the person that was living in that apartment? And that's why I believe it is absolute right and major for you to research. Know who owns this apartment. What do they practice spiritually? What do they do to attract, clients and customers? Because nowadays people are very fickle. I heard a story where there's this landlord who, I hear that, they use, the way they clean bodies at the morgue. That water, I don't know what they do to it. So they have some sort of like a jar or an urn. So when somebody moves out to an apartment, they clean it, they put it in the paint, they paint the walls. And that's why it's very important to speak to the four walls of every household that you live. Speak to it spiritually, because people have deities. What they do is, they get a spiritual leader. A spiritual leader could be the same way there's light, there's darkness, there's witchcraft, there's all these things and new age practices. They use it as an authority to summon people. And that's where you'd see people having rings, you see people having watches, there's people who have beads, there's people who have concussions, there's people you'd shake their hands and you'd feel like I shook hands with somebody who's not just, like you'd feel it if you're conscious spiritually. And that's why spiritual hygiene is something real. Even when it comes to sacrificing, if people in the church sacrifice by tithing 10%, that's a spiritual sacrifice. What will prevent people from the other side not sacrificing? And that's why I had this story that there's this chick, they used to live in a certain apartment, and every 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., people would be sick and they'd experience nightmares. And it's happening. It's happening. So don't be blinded by what's going on around you. Things are not the same anymore. And you have to actually find out. Everything right now is spiritual. Leave alone what you've heard about the Illuminati, the Nini. Things are spiritual. People are doing cycles and cycles of, spirituality to sustain themselves, to keep themselves afloat, to get into jobs, to attract beauty. Beauty is a weapon. Beauty is a weapon. If you look at some of these pageants and how they do the crowning, they don't just crown an ordinary person. They're always spectacular. They have beautiful features. When you look at people who are talented, people who speak, people who come onto podiums to preach and give speeches, even TED speakers, there's something, I'd say, X factor about them. Even the best, most powerful singers, the best, most powerful preachers of the world, televangelists, there's something X factor about them, and they're always backed by a spiritual force that's either of the light or of the dark. So I refuse. And if you're living in any apartment and you feel like your landlord is practicing something, look at the patterns of your life, your financial life. You could move into an apartment and you start going broke all of a sudden. You start experiencing sexual affliction. If you are not masturbating, you start masturbating. If you're not sleeping around, now you start sleeping around. It's like the spirit of lust. And that's why I said money is a spirit, beauty is a spirit, peace of mind is a spirit, joy is a spirit, a stable mindset is a spirit. It's spiritual because unless you tap into, we've seen even people who do, astral projection, meditation. You meditate to be in touch with the spiritual self so that you get centered. And that centeredness is spiritual. And that's why you could be the most beautiful person, but nobody looks at you. You're the most qualified, you have degrees, you have a master's, but you're not getting jobs. Getting jobs is also a spiritual thing. Also, the family you come from, the cycles of the suffering and the victories, you carry along with them. And that's why I said, you're your father, you're your mother's daughter, you're your father's son, and you carry patterns from your family. Those cycles rebirth themselves in your dark life. I don't know. What's your opinion about this? And are you living at an apartment and you feel like you're in bondage? Please, I'd like to hear your comments, your sentiments at the comments.